I do apologise, we don't seem to be getting the audio there from President Joe Biden, but we will, of course, take you back to him as soon as we've sorted out that technical problem there. But we were talking, Tom, just a moment ago about HRH Prince of Wales and what you think he can realistically achieve over these 2 weeks.
What he's doing over these 2 weeks, exactly as I said, he's advised, warning and encouraging. He's also initiating actions in areas where it's hard to get started. And the thing about any sort of piece of innovation is you've got to get started. And what he's able to do is bring people together so that you start on a scale that can be developed from. And I think that matters a lot. But it's not a thing that gives you a result, a sort of headline out of the conference. It's a thing that makes a difference in the real world. And of course, the real world is where the climate
and you can
works.
see as well, Prince William is also stepping up.
Absolutely. And so you've now got a consistent thing through the royal family over decades, from the Queen through the Prince himself and Prince Philip, and then into the next generation, and Prince William taking a very leading role. And they all bring a different bit to it, a different sort of focus or emphasis. So it's now a kind of family tradition.
It's a portfolio approach,
it's a portfolio
from the
approach,
royal
exactly.
family. We were also watching quite horrifying report put together by our special correspondent Alex Crawford about Madagascar. We heard from the president of Madagascar there about deforestation. I know it's a country that you have travelled to, you're very familiar with. Tell us about your perspective, what's going on, what's going wrong?
I've been to Madagascar a few times, actually been in that southern part of Madagascar where the problems are occurring. And it's interesting, you fly over Madagascar, you see that the forest has gone everywhere, and it illustrates a really important problem about, or dynamic in climate change, which it adds stress to already stressed situations. So deforestation has been going on for a very long time, particularly on the as it were, western side of Madagascar. And now you've added this drought stressor to those stresses, and we've seen the results. Now that's happening all over the world, not just in Madagascar, perhaps not as dramatically now. But if you want to look at the future in many parts of the world, including parts of Europe, you're going to see drought making, in a sense, parts of southern Europe uninhabitable if we fail to deal with this problem.
So we can almost look to countries like Madagascar as a pretty frightening bellwether of what we've got to come. And when you hear the president there talking about the number of people, I think he said 90-something% of people use charcoal to cook their food, you realise how big the problem is.
Yes, indeed you do. And if you like, you could see what's happening in Madagascar as the prequel to Climate Change Failure, the movie. And if you don't like the prequel, you probably won't like the movie very much. Now, it will manifest itself differently in different parts of the world, but the same dynamic of already stressed situations, having that stress multiplied, will be in very many parts. So, as we saw last year in the recent weather events.
When you see that report, you have to think, is it too late for countries like Madagascar?
Human beings have enormous resilience, even under the sort of extreme circumstances that we saw in Madagascar. I'm a bit disinclined to say it's too late, but it isn't half a signal to hurry up and get on with it. The message that came out of the G20 and is being repeated here by leaders. So that means we now need to say, as the Prince said, where's the action? What are you doing? Where's the money? And those are the things that really matter now. We've got to get on with it.
And we were hearing from Sir David Attenborough's very powerful call to arms, effectively, wasn't it, on in that opening ceremony, but saying also that humankind is also the most innovative problem solvers, so it's within us.
And I think that's absolutely right. And what's more, if you look around the world and you see what people are doing in their communities, stuff that doesn't get in the headlines, but there's a response everywhere, all over the world, to this by people who are never going to be famous or well-known or get on a stage, but who are actually getting on with doing what they can in their own life, in their family, in their community. And all of that builds up, and it helps to make it easier for politicians to act. The real people who are a bit of a block on this are not the publics around the world, they're the politicians around the world.
From credible government policy flows corporate money, and that also then starts to nudge human behaviour, doesn't it, as well? We were trying to bring a live feed of President Biden a moment ago. We couldn't get the sound sorted, but I'm curious to know, from your perspective, relative to what he promised and what he stands for on climate, are you disappointed?
Well, I'm disappointed, but not in President Biden. I'm disappointed in the US Congress, and in particular the Republicans in the US Congress.
Well, some Democrats as well.
Some Democrats
Some
as well.
Democrat
You're quite right
senators,
about
the West
that.
Virginia one in particular.
One or two senators in particular who've held things up, but they wouldn't have the purchase they had if there wasn't this block solid opposition from the Republicans. So, I mean, in a sense, the Republicans have given those two Democrats rather more leverage than their own party would give them. So I think there's a piece there again about the politicians. What was very interesting about America, and again, apropos my previous point, despite what you saw in the headlines and Trump's withdrawal from the climate convention, all of these things, actually loads of things happened in America at city level and state level and amongst citizens themselves. People got on with doing stuff anyway, even in America, with this very strong message from the government that somehow this wasn't a problem, you know, a bit like you get a message then from someone about how COVID isn't a problem. You've got a similar sort of denial of the real world, which is probably not good for anybody. So I'm disappointed in what America's able to do, but I'm not disappointed in the president doing the best he can to put what America can bring, which is tremendous ingenuity and resources, to tackling this problem.
I imagine you have fairly strong views about the huge amount of money around the world that goes into subsidizing fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, it's just, it seems to me insane. Why would you run water out of into a bath without putting the plug in? I mean, it's exactly that stupid. If we've got to get carbon out of the atmosphere, why are you subsidizing people to put it in when you're trying to stop them with money elsewhere from doing that? It's just completely contradictory.
I saw a grotesque figure about the amount of money that's going in to subsidize fossil fuel around the world. It's something in the trillions, isn't it?
I don't have that number in my head. It's certainly hundreds of billions. Whether it's got to be trillions, I haven't got that number in my head. Even so, it's very large.
But if you diverted that to the 100 billion or the 600
Absolutely.
billion over 6 years, job's done.
Well, except that not all these subsidies are subsidies in the polluting countries. Quite a lot of the subsidies are subsidies in the poorer countries, and they're subsidies to keep the price of gas, or most of all oil, petrol, down. So not all the subsidies are subsidies that are being generated by our government, for instance, still subsidizing North Sea oil, which we should stop immediately. A lot of these governments have real social consequences to deal with if you stop the subsidies, which means we should be putting some money into helping them deal with those social consequences so they can stop subsidizing and they can actually then help us with the broader problem.
Should the British government be even having an inquiry into opening up this Cumbrian coal mine?
I think the Cumbrian coal mine is a particularly bad example because coal, the British government's committed to keeping coal out around the world. It's leading the world in trying to drive coal out of the economy. So it's very hard to understand why it would do the mine, and the argument for it in terms of a different kind of coal doesn't really bear much examination. So I think that's very misleading for the people of Cumbria, by the way, that it's been supporting it. And I see the Prime Minister began to back off a bit just the other day. I think it's more tricky when you come to investment in North Sea oil, and you can't immediately stop
Cambo
investing.
Sands.
Yeah, and those things. Now, it's a more complicated question. And so you have to think, how do you stop that? What's the taper rate at which you get down that investment? You can't turn taps off for fossil fuels because we haven't turned all the taps on for renewables yet. So, and because you use it up, you have to keep investing a little bit in order to retain the flow of oil that you're going to continue to need. But it's not an argument for doing what the current government seems to be doing, willing to think about investing or licensing 30 projects in the North Sea. That's really going way beyond what we need to do.
Okay, all right. Well, don't go far away, Tom, because we're going to want your perspective on things that we're going to be hearing